Let's start with what binding options you can choose from, because this defines the aesthetic of the zine and also dictates how many pages you have. Or maybe the number of pages dictates which binding method you can choose. Chicken and egg, egg and chicken. So if you have up to 40 pages, we'd recommend wire stitching. So wire stitching, saddle stitching or stapling are all the same thing. The sheets are folded in half and then 2 staples are applied down the left hand side to bind the sheets together. So if we have a look at the mechanics here, a sheet is printed both sides and folded in half, then stapled. So a sheet has 4 pages on it. So we class as a page when we come to quote as an actual page of content. So here we've got a sheet which is printed both sides and folded. So we've got a left hand side, a right hand side, flip it over and another left and a right. So 4 pages. So this explains why we quote and we say a 4-page cover, because if you did go for a thicker material for the cover would have 4 pages. The front cover, the inside front cover, inside back cover, and the back cover, making a 4-page cover. So you can see the mechanics here, and they'll get 4 pages per sheet. So we need a multiple of 4 pages for this method of binding to work as a zine. So you can choose an 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36 or 40 page zine. 4 pages folded in half. So you can't have, for example, a 13 or a 25 page zine. 25 page zine would be 24 pages bound in and then just 1 page just flapping around. It doesn't work. So if you want to quote for a wire stitched booklet, make sure it's a multiple of 4 pages. 40 pages is the maximum that we suggest for wire stitching, because when you fold the sheets in half, that's 10 sheets, and we want to make sure that your zine sits as flat as possible. There's a few examples that I'm going to show you now to illustrate this. So here we can see Turves, which is a really nice zine, photography zine about greyhounds and dog training. So this is a 28-page self-cover onto 170-gram uncoated. So self-cover means that the entire publication, all of the sheets are printed onto the same paperweight. So all of the sheets, including the cover here, are onto 170 uncoated, 28 pages altogether. It's A5, and you can see it sits neatly on the desk. Here we have Swirl, which is a magnificent zine. Swirl is an A5 zine again. It has a total of 24 pages, but it's got a 4-page cover onto 300-gram uncoated with a matte lamination, and then it's got the inside pages onto 115 uncoated. So 300-gram for the cover, 115 for the inside pages, and you can see that the cover tends to bounce open. Paper inherently prefers to be flat. We can fold it, obviously, but once it's folded, it does tend to try and get back to flat again, so it always bounces open. People say, oh, can you make sure that my zine is flat and it sits flat on the table? We can say yes, but unfortunately, in all honesty, it's not possible. The paper does always try and bounce a little bit. So this is 24 pages altogether, and you can see that the cover is bouncing up a little bit. Now, like I said, we do recommend 40 pages maximum, but in theory, we can go up to 72 or 76. So here is, again, the brilliant Hate zine. And then this is actually 76 pages wire stitched. So this is at the absolute maximum limit possible. All the pages are onto 100-gram Evolution uncoated. So 100 gram is thin, but even taking into account how thin it is, you can see with 76 pages, there's a curl in the middle, there's a lot of bounce. The inside pages you can see on the profile side here, they actually start from quite a long way away from the staples compared to the cover. So when we come to the right-hand edge of Hate, to make sure that the right-hand edge is trimmed flush and it's straight, those inside pages are actually end up being trimmed kind of 3 to 5 mil shorter than the other pages on the outer extremity of the zine. You see that? So on the left-hand side, they're cutting in. They actually physically start from nearer the middle of the zine. So on the right-hand edge, when those sheets are folded in half, we have to trim more off those pages to ensure it's flush on the outer edge. So Therefore, if you've got any page numbers, so you do have to allow for the fact those pages are going to be trimmed smaller. Page numbers, always a good idea to keep at least 5 to 10 mil away from the page edge because of this very issue. It is spoken about on our website in our wire stitching setup guide in more detail. There's illustrations on there, but this video guide hopefully has helped you understand that problem too. So that's the issue of creep, where you go for a particularly chunky wire stitch zine and the inside pages are pushed out. So the fourth option we'll show you here is an A4 booklet called Courtyard. This is 16 pages in total. Because it's A4, the pages actually fall a little bit flatter, but 16 pages, again, is, if you look at the side here, is really, really neat. It creates a really, really neat publication. So you come to wire stitching. Zines, old school kind of zines that you'd make on a photocopier, they would all be printed onto the same paperweight anyway. So if you wanted to go down that route, that's definitely going to create a neater bind. If you did want to go for a thicker cover, 300 gram uncoated or 300 gram silk is the kind of go-to for the cover. And then 115 uncoated or 130 silk for your inside pages. But you could definitely reduce the cover weight a little bit, make it slightly flimsier, which will enable it to sit neater on the desk. But like I say, we're not going to lie and say it definitely won't bounce open. There is a high chance that it will do. It creates a bit of charm. It is paper after all, but having something tangible in people's hands is nicer than you just sending them a PDF. So that's wire stitching. So realistically, we say let's cap it at 40 pages. We can go a lot higher, but you do have to allow for creep and you have to allow for a lot of bounce if you go down that route. The other option for binding is perfect binding. So if we have a look at the profile of this perfect bound zine, you see the inside pages are trimmed into a text block, then the left-hand edges are roughened up, glue is applied, and then the cover is printed as a continuous spread from the front cover around to the back. That's wrapped around the text block and glued on, and then we put a 6 to 8 mil hinge on the front and the back cover here, so the cover opens nice and neatly, and in theory it should fall flat again. So perfect binding possibly looks more professional. It's definitely more high-end. It's a more costly process. If you go for 40 pages or more, this is the route that we'd propose you go down. It creates a neater bind. You don't have to worry about the bounce as much and the curling on the inside pages, because you can see it's a very neat text block. 40 pages or more. So 40 pages will give you a 3 mil spine if you go for 115 uncoated or 130 silk. But we can do this method for anything up to 300 or 400 pages. Really chunky. The glue that we use is PUR glue, which is a process that makes the text pages incredibly resilient. Move on to the next point. Can we perfect bind for under 40 pages? Well, we do say no really to that, because we have done it before on as low as 28, and you just don't get the thickness of the text pages to actually get enough glue to go down. And honestly, when people open the cover up and they start reading it, the pages can just pull out. There's physically not enough glue down the left-hand edge to hold the pages in, and they just pull out. So let's keep perfect binding to 40 pages minimum, which is a 4-page cover and 36 inside pages. So because of the amount of glue that goes down, the cover itself has to be a little bit more resilient. So we say a minimum of 170 gram for the cover. Anything thinner and the glue would just seep through and it wouldn't do the job. I've spoken about matte lamination on the wire stitch zines, and we've touched on it again on the perfect bound zines. It's a really, really good idea to laminate the front cover of your publication if you go for 170 gram or thicker, because when the sheets are folded in half, the ink does have a tendency to crack. If you've got ink coverage where they're folded, the paper's made of fibres. Again, like we've mentioned, they don't like being folded, so when they do, if there's ink on there, the ink and the paper tends to crack. Lamination prevents that, so it's just an extra thin layer of film. Doesn't really alter the colour of your printing underneath it, but it just protects the fibres of the paper and means we can fold it without having any issues of cracking. If it did crack, obviously it's a front cover, it's the first thing people see, and it does look scruffy and it does look like a bit of a mistake. So with lamination, you have the option of matte lamination, which is the most common. We've got gloss lamination here, which looks amazing. If you're going to go for a comic or a graphic novel, then your illustrations and your colours are really, really going to jump through when you've got a gloss lamination. So we've got gloss matte, we've got soft touch, which has a kind of velvet feel. Looks quite professional, maybe a little bit more corporate. I don't think old school zines would have even entertained the idea of using soft touch lamination. Or you can go for anti-scuff, which is something we probably go for once a year maybe. It's not very common at all at the moment. Matte lamination is definitely the go-to. It goes well with uncoated and it goes well with silk. Not much of a sheen, and it just feels professional. So there are your two options for binding: wire stitching up to 40 pages, perfect binding 40 pages or more. The advantage of wire stitching is you can see you can actually press the pages completely flat, so you don't lose any content or any information on the double page spreads. With perfect binding, you've got 2 or 3 mil in the centre of the pages, which we call the spine gutter, and this is discussed on our perfect binding setup guide online as well. You can find that in the resource section on our website. 2 to 3 mil on each side of a double page spread is kind of obscured and lost, because again, you really don't want the reader to be forcing down the front cover of the book too much. It will risk breaking the spine. So if you've got images that are double page spreads, you can cheat a little bit. In InDesign, you can split the image into 2. You nudge the left hand half left by 2 mil and the right hand half right by 2 mil. And on the finished book, it gives the illusion that they meet up, even though on the file it will look a little bit funky because you'll have some of the image duplicated through the center. But when it's printed and you lose that section in the middle there, it does mean that it does visually look like it's going to meet up to the reader. I think that's everything on the page count and the binding. At the top end of perfect binding, you can go for however many pages you need really. This one for Goldsmiths, it's probably 300 or 400 pages. We can go super chunky. This one's over 2 centimeters thick. It's A4 as well, which means the pages do open up a little bit easier than they would do on like a more compact perfect bound book. This one for Kingston again is 220 pages. Because it's A6, it's a lot harder for the reader to press the pages down. However, this is very compact. It's a nice little degree show catalogue, A6 size.